Have you ever heard the phrase, I was scared to death? Well, what if you could actually be quite literally scared to death?
She loves Halloween. She's been in this costume for days, and I have to go out of town today for work.
Last trip was Brazil. I got to go too.
I couldn't take her with me on this one, so we had Halloween early. We watched part of a scary movie, and
Poltergeist. It was awesome.
I paged Dr. Robbins.
Ah, you page, you got me. Taryn, I'm Dr. Karev. So, you have a stomach ache. You don't know any magic spells to fix it?
well, we had some candy last night during the movie, and she got sick a few times.
Candy for dinner. Nice.
Ow.
She has some guarding and a fever, so it's probably not the candy. I'd like to do further testing. Draw labs.
I still get to trick or treat, right?
Are you kidding? The best trick-or-treating in Seattle is right here on the peds floor. You go around with these huge pillowcases, and everyone hands out as much candy as you can carry.
So here we have Taryn's patient file. Taryn's a 10-year-old girl presenting symptoms of the stomach ache and vomiting.
Tara's labs show a slightly elevated white count, and some of her electrolytes are off. Is she gonna be here overnight? It's just that her dad wants to know if he should change his flight.
Yeah, his 8-year-old has a potentially surgical abdomen. She needs CT. She's in pain. He should change his flight.
After assessing Taryn's symptoms, the doctors decided to run bloods to check for any abnormalities. Her labs show an elevated white blood cell count coupled with low sodium and high potassium, indicating her normal range of electrolytes are off. So far, Taryn has presented symptoms including abdominal pain, guarding, a fever, and labs have shown an elevated white blood cell count as well as low sodium and high potassium. These symptoms indicate the issue is central to her abdominal region and could possibly be appendicitis, a tumor located somewhere in her gastric tract, or it could even be blastomycosis, which is a fungal infection.
I got the kid's CT.
You want to fill me in? Adrenal glands are enlarged with high potassium, low glucose, adrenal insufficiency. Her body's not producing enough adrenaline.
Glad you can read.
But there's no tumor. Unless it's an infection, maybe blastomycosis. Oh god, her dad mentioned that they just went to Brazil.
Are you kidding me? You didn't think you should put that in her chart?
Thanks for your help, and I'm sorry about the last-minute cancellation.
Where is she?
She was just here. She was asking about trick-or-treating around the hospital, and I just stepped out to change my
You
clothes.
couldn't keep an eye on her for 5 minutes?
And what's going on?
Taryn's body isn't producing adrenaline.
You know what adrenaline does? It keeps your organs from going into shock and shutting down when you get hurt or traumatized or scared.
You said that she started to feel sick last night, watching the scary movie.
She wanted to watch.
She's wandering through the hospital on Halloween. Look, if something frightens her, she could go into shock.
She could get scared to death.
We gotta go find her.
Taryn recently visited Brazil with her dad, which is a country that contains many foreign insects, bacteria, and fungi, which you would not be regularly exposed to in the United States. In fact, Brazil is home to the fungus paracoccidioides and is endemic to Latin America. Fungal infections can affect the adrenal glands, causing primary adrenal insufficiency. Her CT scan shows that her adrenal glands are enlarged, further explaining the abnormal electrolyte levels and tender abdomen. Okay, let's recall Taryn's symptoms and results so far. She was presented to the doctors with abdominal pain and vomiting after watching a scary movie and eating some sugary sweets. Her blood results came back with elevated white blood cells coupled with high potassium, low sodium, and low glucose. Finally, her CT scan showed that her adrenal glands were enlarged. Taking these into account with the recent trip to Brazil leads to the diagnosis of adrenal insufficiency, meaning her body is not producing the essential hormones needed for proper organ functioning. The adrenal glands produce hormones epinephrine, cortisol, and aldosterone. These hormones help regulate your metabolism, blood pressure, immune system, and most importantly, your response to stress. When the body is faced with the stress factor, the adrenal glands release a surge of hormones including adrenaline, cortisol, and aldosterone, which boosts energy supplies.
Trick or treat.
So what exactly is happening inside Taryn's body that causes her to collapse? When met with an apparent threat, the hypothalamus sends direct signals via the sympathetic nervous system to the adrenal glands, causing them to release a catecholamine and epinephrine, which is the same as adrenaline. It leads to an urgent action by stimulating faster breathing and heart rates. The medulla of the adrenal gland also secretes another catecholamine, norepinephrine, which works with epinephrine to stimulate liver cells to release glucose to make more fuel available for cellular respiration. These hormones have short-term effects as the nerve impulses are sent from the hypothalamus. Hormones secreted by the adrenal cortex provide a slower, longer-acting or chronic response to the stress. In this event, the hypothalamus secretes a releasing hormone which causes the anterior pituitary to secrete an adrenal-stimulating hormone, also known as adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, and this signals the cells in the adrenal cortex to produce and secrete corticosteroids. Saying that, the improper functioning of the adrenal glands results in a condition known as adrenal insufficiency. Addison's disease results from primary adrenal insufficiency where the adrenal glands becomes damaged or destroyed and stops producing hormones. Shown here is adrenal gland cross-section with the inner medulla and outer cortex. The inner medulla secretes hormones adrenaline or epinephrine and norepinephrine. The outer cortex secretes hormones aldosterone and cortisol. When Taryn travelled to Brazil with her dad, she was infected with paracoccidioidomycosis. The fungus went on to attack her adrenal glands, leading to Addison's disease. Infection of the adrenal glands causes hormone secretions to be depleted, therefore resulting in organ failure. Moving on to the biochemistry of Addison's disease. As aforementioned, Addison's disease results from the inability of the adrenal cortex to synthesize and secrete glucocorticoid, primarily cortisol, and mineralocorticoid, primarily aldosterone hormones. The cortex secretes glucocorticoid, mineralocorticoid, and sex steroid hormones which are synthesized from cholesterol obtained from both high-density lipoproteins and low-density lipoproteins in plasma. The medulla secretes catecholamines, principally adrenaline. There are two types of adrenal insufficiency: primary adrenal insufficiency and secondary adrenal insufficiency. Addison's disease is classified as primary adrenal insufficiency, where the adrenal glands cannot produce an adequate amount of hormones despite a normal or increased corticotropin or ACTH level. Secondary adrenal insufficiency contrasts this, as it is characterized by the shortage of hormone ACTH that is produced by the pituitary gland, which then in turn results in depletion of adrenal hormones. Coming back to our patient Taryn Davis, she displayed original symptoms of abdominal pain, vomiting, guarding, and a fever before she was brought to the hospital. Now, other symptoms of Addison's disease may include hyperpigmentation, muscle weakness, weight loss, craving of salty foods, lethargy, low appetite, fatigue, and thirst. Starting with the mineralocorticoid aldosterone, aldosterone helps control the balance of water and salts in the kidney by keeping sodium in and releasing potassium from the body. This hormone therefore has a direct effect on blood pressure. Aldosterone exerts its primary effect through actions of the kidneys but also functions in the colon and sweat glands. Aldosterone is part of an axis that work together and are called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Together, these hormones decrease potassium, increase sodium, and increase both blood volume and pressure. Aldosterone is secreted in response to elevated levels of renin. Its role is to bind to receptors on two types of cells along the distal convoluted tubule of the nephron. Firstly, the sodium-potassium ion pumps of the principal cells are stimulated and drive potassium from the blood into the cell. From there, it flows down its concentration gradient into the tubule to be excreted as urine. At the same time, the pumps drive sodium in the opposite direction from the cell into the blood, which allows more sodium to flow from the tubule into the cell down its concentration gradient. And since water often flows with sodium through a process of osmosis, water also moves into blood, which increases blood volume and therefore blood pressure. The next hormone secreted by the adrenal cortex is cortisol. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid that regulates a wide range of processes in the body, including metabolism and immune response. It also has a very important role in helping the body respond to stress. Blood levels of cortisol vary throughout the day, but generally are higher in the morning when we wake up and then fall throughout the day. This is called a diurnal rhythm. In people that work at night, this pattern is reversed, so the timing of cortisol release is clearly linked to daily activity patterns. In addition, in response to stress, extra cortisol is released to help the body to respond appropriately. Cortisol is needed in times of both emotional and physical stress. For example, when your goldfish dies, or if you're being chased by a dog. In these situations, the hypothalamus, which is an almond-sized structure situated at the base of the brain, releases corticotropin-releasing hormone, which is then received by the pituitary gland, a pea-sized structure sitting just underneath the hypothalamus. In response, the pituitary gland sends out adrenocorticotropin hormone, also known as ACTH, which travels through the blood to the adrenal glands and signals cells there to release cortisol. One of cortisol's main jobs is to increase blood glucose levels by promoting gluconeogenesis in the liver. Gluconeogenesis is the formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, such as amino acids or free fatty acids. Cortisol also causes muscles to break down proteins into amino acids and gets adipose tissue to break down fats into free fatty acids, both of which provide the liver with more raw materials to work with. Again, coming back to our patient, the first symptoms Taryn displayed were a result of watching a scary movie. The content of this film put Taryn's body under stress as she felt afraid or theoretically in danger. Taryn's body needed the essential adrenal hormones aldosterone, cortisol, and adrenaline to respond appropriately, but since her adrenal glands were damaged, she was not able to produce these essential hormones. Once she was brought into hospital, these symptoms only worsened over time, and the sight of a terrifying-looking woman to a child of Taryn's age resulted in her going into shock from adrenal crisis. Luckily for Taryn, Addison's disease can be treated by replacing the missing hormones with synthetic versions of them. Cortisol is replaced by hydrocortisone, and aldosterone is replaced by fludrocortisone. So although Addison's disease can effectively scare you to death, this is not the case for those who are treated on time with hormone replacement therapy like Taryn.